To all our viewers from the United States, Korea, and around the world, welcome to Global Money Talk by SamPro.TV, live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. And I'm your host, Remy Blair, and you're watching our live broadcast from the financial capital of the nation here in New York City. We'll begin the hour with the market briefing and live coverage of the U.S. markets. Today, for the market briefing, I am joined by Tai Wong, independent proprietary trader. In addition, today we'll have Sang Lee, the founder of SPC Investments, to talk about how to select great investment managers. Tai, good morning to you. Thank you for joining me. Well, today is the 23rd anniversary of 9/11, and the annual remembrance ceremony took place at the 9/11 Memorial in Lower Manhattan today, Tai, and President Biden was there with Vice President Harris, and former President Trump also attended. Here at the New York Stock Exchange, we had a moment of silence before the opening bell. And what a somber moment as we mark this anniversary, Tai.
Yeah, for us, many of us of a certain age, and I wasn't working downtown. I had worked downtown for some years, but the events of that morning, and it was a morning just like this morning, a beautiful morning, not a cloud in the sky, and you know, it's seared into memory. And I remember when we had news, and I was working in a trading floor in Stamford, Connecticut, that a plane had flown into the World Trade Center. The first thing I thought of was, oh heavens, it's like 1945 all over again, when in heavy fog, Air Force pilots crashed B-25 bomber into the Empire State Building. And we went about life as nothing had changed. We're on conference calls, and then just after 9 o'clock, when that second plane went in, everybody stopped, and you know, all of a sudden it was something different. And as time went on and we found out the news about it, the world had changed, and it reminded me of a class that I took in, at school. There's a political science named Francis Fukuyama, who wrote a book, an essay, and then a book called The End of History, for whom he's a little infamous for right now. But he had said in the early 90s that, liberal democracy is in the ascendant, and we don't have anything more to worry about. And 23 years ago today, we realized that we was a little, if not wrong, certainly a little too early.
And Tai, as you mentioned, a lot of people remember where they were the first moment they heard about these events unfolding. And all of us remember, if we were alive when 9/11 took place, we remember where we were and how the events affected all of us. And it's really hard to believe that it's already been 23 years.
I'm glad you brought up remembrance. And people who are in college now, forget people who are in high school, have no organic memory of that day. It's just sort of become history, which, if you could bring up graphic one, the high school kids in my town do something, graphic one, I think it's number of flags actually. They do something every year, there we go, which is, really amazing. And they spend the weekend before, they put down 3,000 flags on the front lawn of the school, and and people really will slow down, they will stop, they will look, and it's a memory. I think that's important. So today of all days, that people remember what happened and the lessons that we learned from it. And some of them were tough lessons, but I think this is a great thing that the kids do every year.
Absolutely, and I think that's such a poignant photo that you're sharing with the viewing audience, because nearly 3,000 lives were lost that day, and so many lives across the country were affected by those terrorist attacks.
You're right, and recently, I think that we passed that threshold that first responders who died from 9/11 related illnesses who were working in the area is now well over 3,000. So more people have passed from related illnesses that actually passed on that day. And that number will unfortunately probably continue to climb slowly over the years.
And you think about all the first responders, all the people that came together, not just in New York City, but also in D.C. as well, Pennsylvania, on that day to respond to what happened and the complications and illnesses that ended up affecting them. So I'm glad you brought that up as well, Tai. But we are here at the New York Stock Exchange, and we did have that moment of silence here at the New York Stock Exchange to commemorate that 9/11 event 23 years ago. But we are also seeing the major U.S. stock averages in negative territory on this Wednesday morning. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down by triple digits this morning and about 1.5% lower on the session. The NASDAQ Composite Index is lower as well, off by over 170 points or 1%. And the S&P 500 is also in negative territory, down by nearly 1.4% on the session. Now, Tai, we did get the release of the CPI data for the latest month, and it did come in mostly in line with expectations, but we saw higher shelter costs as well when it came to inflation. But of course, why are the markets down? And this does come ahead of the Fed Reserve meeting next week. So can you break this down for us?
Sure. What troubled the market, and you saw it instantly in the price action of gold, is, and gold dropped quickly, but at the end not very much, is the core inflation, which is what the Fed cares more about, because it doesn't include food, it doesn't include energy, which gasoline prices coming down because of lower oil prices have dragged down that headline CPI. But because shelter has been stubborn, and because it was higher, we got 0.3 in core. So previous to CPI, 70% of the market thought that we would have a 25 basis point cut, only 30% 50. Subsequent to that, we're probably at 90-10. There are a few stubborn holdouts who think the Fed really ought to go 50. And they may or may not be right, but it's not going to happen. So the Fed, I think, looks at it this way. At 1 or 2, remember they have a 2% target for inflation. At 1/10 or 2/10 per month, they're happy to have their foot on the accelerator. But at 3/10, it starts flashing yellow. And at 4/10, they're going to tap the brakes. As a matter of fact, if you remember early this year, people said, we're going to get 6 to 7, 8 cuts this year. And what stopped that? Because in January, February, and March, core inflation are up 4/10 every month. And the Fed said, we're not at 4/10, that's 4.8 for the year. They're not doing anything to rate. So we'll get our 25 basis points. They'll say we'll be vigilant, and more numbers like these will make them cautious. And I think this disappointment is what brought markets down. I mean, as a matter of fact, as I look at it now, the top gainers on the S&P 500, they're basically all in the red. They're the ones who have lost the least. Although I have to give to American Express, they're trying a little hard to get back into the green here. But when the entire board, as a practical matter, is in the red, it says there's just disappointment here. The other thing I would add is bonds are up, but they're only up a little bit. And the reason is I think bonds have gotten a little ahead of the market, and the 2-year at 360, 370, it's not going to go. Do we really think even 2-year rates will be down there at those levels in 2 years' time? Perhaps not. So I think the bond market may have gotten a little ahead of themselves.
So I'm glad you touched on the bond market, Tai, and mentioned that we're nearly little change today. But does that raise any concerns, especially since we're talking about this disinversion we saw in the yield curve?
I think that remains to be seen. We'll have to see how, we've got a lot of supply coming out. We'll see how well the market digests this supply. But I do think we are at a short-term high. I would probably be looking to take profit if you've got a long bond position or anything that's like a long bond position, an analog like that. I would probably take a little profit. I think you might get a better chance to reload. And I think even if Powell were unusually dovish, I'm not sure it would rally that much more. And I actually see him as, next week, this time next week, or a little, this time on Wednesday, to be very measured.
Yes, hard to believe, but we're fast approaching that Fed meeting for the month of September. So from the 17th to the 18th, it'll be a 2-day meeting for the Federal Reserve, and we get that rate decision on the afternoon of the 18th, followed by Powell's comments. So a lot to look forward to as we head into next week. And before we move away from equities, I do want to take a look at financials. So yesterday you mentioned how financials were lower in the morning, and I do want to take a look at JP Morgan. So what's going on here, Tai?
Where is JP Morgan right? I'm sure it's down. It's a question of how much.
It does appear to be down by nearly 0.9% in New York morning trade.
So yesterday, I think about the time our broadcast was going on, the president of JP Morgan, Daniel Pinto, had made some comments to the effect that he thought that the street's projections for net interest income, which is what JP Morgan and other banks earn on the spread between where they lend money and where they can fund themselves, is far too high. He said these things are. I think it may have been. I may be paraphrasing him, but it's a little out of whack. And with rates coming lower, that spread tends to narrow for the banks. So that's why all the financials got hit so hard yesterday. And as people, perhaps the analysts rushed to say, okay, are we wrong on NII or net interest income here, and do we have to rejigger our numbers to be in line? If the president of JP Morgan is telling us we're wrong, he probably knows something, and he wants to set expectations. So when the earnings come out, actually you'll get a rally instead of a horrible surprise. So he's really setting expectations, which is smart.
And Tai, I remember this time yesterday you and I were talking and looking at the financials, and we're trying to figure out exactly why they were lower. And it was interesting because it came on the heels of the Federal Reserve capital requirements announcements, which was lower than half of what had been expected. So.
Yeah, I mean, it made sense when we saw the story after the broadcast, why financials are down so aggressively, including Bank of America, all the big banks.
And one sector I do want to shift over to right now is, so we talked about treasuries. So what's going on when it comes to commodities as well as FX and gold today? We did get some hawkish comments out from the BOJ, and we did see gains for the yen. But in terms of these sectors, what's going on today?
So the yen has continued to strengthen. It's up probably about 0.6%, 141 or so yen to the dollar. Could we see below 140? Maybe not immediately, but certainly possible. And when the yen rallies, especially if the market's trying to lean against it, dollar-yen moves can be really, really vicious. And as an old FX trader, I remember dollar-yen goes up on an escalator and comes down in an elevator. So I suspect that if we get a probe under 140, there may be stop losses there from people who are long, who are saying we like to carry trade, and the fact that we've come off so much from the highs, almost 20 yen to the high, I think it was 162. There might be value here. If they're forced to stop out because a lot of these speculators trade on very substantial margin ratios, then you could see a strike. A much stronger yen, at least for a brief period, before more people do the carry trade and say we're still going to have 450, 475 basis points of carry in this trade. So yen strength is a very good point. Gold has been steady. It's only 1% or so below the all-time historic highs. I don't think it will get there today, certainly not with this CPI, but it is still a bull market. And in a bull market like that, you really only have two, I think, reasonable positions. You can be long or you can be flat, but it's not the time to be short. There'll be a day when it's time to be short gold, but that's not today. What I would like to comment on is looks like crude oil is finally up today. It's been down, for substantially over the past week, the past month or so. I think we may have found a little bottom short term. You could argue that with the results of the debate, that it's not as good for fossil fuels and carbon going forward. But and so less supply means higher crude prices. But I do think this might be just a bit of profit taking after a long run down.
And of course, Tai, we have yet to cover the debate, so let's get straight to it. So here we are a day after the first presidential debate between Trump and Harris. And both candidates were here in New York City over by One World Trade Center to commemorate the anniversary of 9/11. But of course, here we are. We've digested what the candidates spoke about, and we've been looking at some of the social media commentary as well. So interesting reactions across the board. But in terms of the issues that they spoke on, they covered a lot of ground. What did you think of the performance of both of the candidates?
Well, I was all ready with my bucket of popcorn and a big soda in front of my sofa, and You know, I would say that I left most of the popcorn uneaten. It was. It reminded me of a boxing match where sort of two boxers would swing at each other and neither of them would connect very much. It was a performance where we thought it would be style over substance, and it certainly was that. I think the consensus is that Vice President Harris had the better of the debate. At least she sort of sounded better and calmer, where Trump is Trump. He is, you know, he's excessive on hyperbole. He always has been. It's always the best. It's always the most beautiful. I don't think that you can change him. And I was watching some of the markets very carefully, looking at defense stocks and looking at, if we go to graphic 2, I was watching the markets while the debate was happening and right after. So here's some of the post-debate indicators. And this was, as you can tell from the timestamp, a little bit after midnight. I looked at, so the S&P futures were down, you know, that's 0.5%. Gold was up a little bit. Bonds were up, and these were all indications. Bitcoin was down. These are all indications that the market, or whoever was trading at the time, thought that Harris got the better of the debate yesterday. You know, because you're going to see, because I think Trump is going to be friendlier on taxes and regulations for stocks, which is why S&P futures were down a bit, and conversely, if the stock market doesn't do as well, if the economy doesn't do as well, you would normally buy bonds, and you know, certainly there was a little bit of bid to bonds, and Trump is a late convert to crypto, so Bitcoin was down substantially, which is I think sort of validates the premise that the vice president had a better day. But that, sorry, go ahead.
No, yes, go ahead.
But that said, and we won't know until probably next week, because I'm sure the polling folks are doing all the polls now, pre-debate, now post-debate, to see if, you know, how people felt about it, who won, and then if it would change how they voted. We'll probably get some of those results coming out perhaps as soon as the weekend, or early next week, because they usually like to do polls over sort of several days. Unfortunately, I don't know if it really moved the needle. I do think, having watched the entire thing, and at one point I said to myself, in this great republic, is this really the best we could do? Couldn't we do a little bit better? You had certainly, now I have to say, the CNN folks in the first debate played it straight. I think the ABC folks certainly leaned in one direction that has, you know, the Trump partisans quite riled up this morning. So Trump made some points. Harris sounded better, but did it really move the needle? And one thing I was with debates, I think you want to do most of your damage or make your points in the first half, because by the second half, unless you're a junkie like me, you've gone off to do something else, to be perfectly honest. At 11 o'clock, you're not watching this. One thing I did notice, and it struck me, was Vice President Harris had the look of sort of, it was hard to pin down, but I thought contempt during when she wasn't speaking during the first half of the debate, and contempt's just not a good look. It's not a good emotion, and it struck me. And I noticed also that she didn't do it in the second half, and I think her team probably told her to say, just be neutral when you're not speaking. So at the end of the day, I think the effect is marginal. Whether it moves the needle remains to be seen, but in a very tight election, marginal could be important. But we still have 55 days before the election.
Well, the countdown is on until the beginning of November, U.S. presidential election day here in the U.S. on November 5th. But I think some of the sentiment that you just expressed, Tai, you are not alone there. And that's really interesting, your observation of the behavior of both of the candidates. I do believe the price action we saw in terms of crypto, so unlike other markets such as the equity markets, that is something that you can keep your eyes on in terms of price action. And there were some expectations from those in the crypto camp that something might come up when it came to crypto, but we didn't hear anything from either Harris or Trump in terms of that. So
yeah, they were too busy sort of throwing mud to really talk about crypto, I think. The great thing about the crypto market, as you say, is literally it is the only 24/7 market, so you can always watch to see what the prevailing sentiment is at well, whatever, you can watch it Saturday, Saturday morning or Sunday night, wherever it is. But it is a good market in that it gives you an indication of what's going on.
And you also mentioned the first presidential debate, in which case it was Biden and then Trump. But we have come a long way this summer, and it's hard to believe everything that's happened, not just in politics, but also geopolitics and overall market volatility this summer, because it was only months ago until we heard that Biden will officially be stepping down, and then we had the attempted assassination of President Trump as well. So much has gone on, and as you mentioned, less than 60 days until that election day.
And as you say, it's been so busy that it seems, an age ago that President Biden dropped out, and and even longer that Trump was shot. And I think people forget that had that bullet been 2 centimeters to the right, it would have been maybe a different country, maybe a much more divided country. So thankfully it only grazed him and injured him. But it has been a very busy time, and the question is now, will there be another debate? And after watching yesterday, sometimes I wish, as much as a political junkie that I am, I wish, do we really need one? Are they going to say anything different? So I think Trump will not agree to one unless it's on Fox News, because he really felt that, he literally came out and said it was 3-on-1. And in some ways, he has inaccuracies, but he may be not far from the truth there. So I think if he gets it on Fox News, he'll do it. But if he doesn't, I think it'll pass, and I think the American people won't be missing very much if they do. Sad to say.
And I agree with you when it comes to the polling. We'll have to wait and see whether this did move the needle at all. I'm sure we'll find out in the coming days, as you mentioned as well. So very quickly, Tai, before we wrap it up for today, I understand that Taylor Swift, right?
Yes.
The pop star, she made her endorsement. What did you make of that?
It wasn't so much of a surprise, because I think she's made her political leanings, sort of well known, and so I think it was, everything she does is really, really planned and organized, and that's why she's such a great star. I mean, there's nothing left to chance. She waited till after the debate and endorsed Vice President Harris, which is really her right. I think her fans are I don't know how many of them vote, but we're probably voting for Vice President Harris anyway. But it's certainly interesting when you could argue that the world's biggest pop star comes right out and and makes an endorsement. You certainly wouldn't. I've taken daughters to Taylor Swift concerts, and you would not diminish anything that she does, because she has certainly a great amount of star power, and people love to see what's going on with her.
And for viewers out there who may not be familiar with actual endorsements, right? Because you think about a democracy and the voting system here in the U.S. What does it actually mean when a star endorses a candidate? It was interesting because when the DNC took place in Chicago, there are expectations that Beyonce might show up as well. But what are the implications of something like that?
I think it makes for a great story, and it gives us, folks like us, something to talk about, which is great. At the end of the day, I think unless it is a great surprise, I don't know how much endorsements matter. So I think the Harris campaign, or I don't know if they work closely with the Cheneys, and Liz Cheney was famously very critical of Trump and was drummed out of office afterwards, that when you get 200 Republicans who are voting for Harris, that might be meaningful. But then the other side are going to say they're Republicans in name only rhinos. So it's good theater, but this election is going to come down to the wire, and I know it will probably be here election night, poring over the results, and hopefully it doesn't go too far after that. I think the markets would take it very badly if we had uncertainty for 10 days after the election or more.
Okay, Tai, well, we do have to wrap it up. We'll take a quick look at the markets right now. We are seeing the major stock averages come off earlier lows, but the Dow Jones Industrial Average does remain lower, down by 1.5%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index is off a session lows, but is off by about 0.8% at the 11:30 hour. And meanwhile, the S&P 500 remains lower as well and is down by 1.3%. Well, Tai, it was great having you here. I look forward to speaking with you soon.
See you tomorrow.
And coming up, I will be joined by Sang Lee, founder of SPC Investments. We'll be right back. Don't go away.